DPS mains. Don't you just feel like they exist everywhere? Every single game you get stuck with 5 other DPS mains. You're a DPS main, your dad's a DPS main, your second cousin is a DPS main. It feels like everybody in Overwatch is a DPS main. Well, that's because they actually are. I've looked at the statistics, and when you look at them, you can see that DPS heroes are picked more often than every other category of hero in the game. We're going to be talking about that exact thing here today. We're going to have a general discussion about it. Is this statistic a good thing, a bad thing? Whose fault is it? And if it is a problem, how do we fix it? I'm going to retroactively jump in here after I've finished recording the video to tell you we're going to go all over the place. This video is kind of ranty, but it also has a very clear and concise point at the end. So if you don't follow me, wait until the end and you'll see. We're going to start off with the question of why exactly are there so many DPS mains? Is it because everybody likes dealing the damage? Is it because Blizzard made them do it? Well, I'm about to show you a statistic that will shock some of you. It'll completely blow your mind. Are you ready for this? These are all the heroes we have currently in Overwatch. Yes, this is all of them on the live servers. Now, let's cross out the heroes that are not DPS heroes. We barely crossed out anybody. There are more DPS heroes than every other category of hero combined. This, I think, is the sole reason there are so many DPS players. I mean, if you think about it, if an equal amount of the community plays every single hero, which doesn't occur, but if it did occur, we would still have an even worse DPS problem than we do now. We'd still have too many damage dealers. So the question is, what can be done? What is the problem and what is the solution? Well, my problem with the fact that we have way too many DPSs in Overwatch compared to the rest of the heroes isn't that there's just too many of them, it's that the meta doesn't allow usually more than 2, and we've seen the meta evolve to the point where we see 0 DPS heroes and also only 1 DPS hero. In the previous 3-3 comp that was run a while ago, in the new 3 tanks, 2 supports, 1 DPS comp, which is also very viable. So we're seeing that the biggest category of hero is actually the least viable, it would seem, in a few scenarios, which is a problem, I think. When you have so many DPS heroes in the game, I think the meta should definitely allow for at least 3 of them per game. But if you have 3 DPS heroes, most people just write off the game as a loss because that's too many according to the meta. And right there we have our problem, the meta. The meta isn't all-encompassing, it doesn't tell you what you have to play, but it does give you basically the optimal strategies and the optimal team compositions. And at no point has the meta been more than 2 DPS heroes. We've seen some small exceptions where Mei is run in the place of a tank, but in the end that doesn't really count as a tank, but it is kind of in line with one of our solutions, which we'll talk about later. Right now, I think the problem is we have way too many DPS heroes, but they're not seen enough in compositions. You don't see a lot of them, which really limits the amount of team compositions we can have. Someone did the math, and if you added 1 tank or 1 healer to the game, you would be increasing the amount of viable team compositions by, I think, 10 times more than you would if you added another DPS hero. Don't quote me on that though, I don't have that pulled up, I just remember seeing it, so the statistics may be off, but I do remember quite clearly that when you add a non-DPS hero to the game, the amount of viable team compositions that fit into our current meta standard, which is 2-2-2 or 3-2-1, goes up exponentially more than if you add another damage dealing hero. This is why you almost always see Lucio Ana run at higher ranks, and in the pro scene, Lucio Ana is the most standard, most common, rock solid support setup. And as far as tanks go, it's why you very frequently see Reinhardt and Zarya. Occasionally you'll see Roadhog too, or Winston, but like there's only 4 tanks that are viable right now. So there isn't enough variety to warrant counter picks that often. The game is supposed to be based around counter picks, you know? If someone is countering you, you switch to a different hero when the time is optimal. But right now, that doesn't even happen that often, at least at higher ranks and in the pro scene. I can't speak to lower ranks, but I mean in the pro scene, it's not uncommon. In fact, it's extremely common to see 2 teams on the exact same composition, the exact same 6 heroes. And more often than not, when this doesn't occur, there is only a 1 hero difference. That is most common. I'd be willing to say 95+% of the time, there's like a 1 hero difference between the two teams. And when there's more than that, it's because a team is trying a crazy strat, like when Ninjas in Pajamas did the 3-3 comp, 3 supports and 3 tanks. I may be getting a little off track here, but I think this problem really stems down to the way DPS heroes interact with the meta. The meta has never warranted more than 2 of them, which I said, but there are more DPS heroes than all other hero types in the game. And by DPS hero, if you don't know what I mean, heroes that are meant to do damage. That is your assault and defense category, and some people try to claim that Roadhog is a DPS as well. So sure, we'll throw him in. Those are your DPS heroes. Heroes that are picked because of their damage output. No other reason. Now, there are some things that can be done, and let's start talking about them because Blizzard has started to implement one of them, and one of them is actually Sombra. Sombra is an interesting DPS because, well, she does have a good damage output with her SMG, but it's not going to be the reason she's picked. I can say that with confidence. She's going to be picked because of her utility, and the same reason is why Mei gets picked, because they have utility that offers various advantages in certain situations. If you're wondering how this leads to a solution, let me explain. I think the DPS heroes that have some utility built into them should really have their utility toned up and maybe their damage toned down, depending on which hero. Some heroes just need buffs, because I think there should be room in the meta for more than 2 DPS on one team. And I don't mean just 3 straight damage dealers. We don't want to see Hanzo, Widowmaker, and McCree on a team. I'm talking 3 different types of damage dealers. Maybe a Sombra, a McCree for the damage, and then a Tracer to get behind enemy lines. Something like that. That wouldn't maybe be optimal, but I'm saying DPS heroes need to be far more dynamic. They're all too similar right now to warrant picking some of them. Like Widowmaker, for example. She can be good in the right hands, we've all seen that, but she isn't seen in the pro scene because a good McCree simply outclasses her in almost every way, which is kind of what I'm trying to get at with this first solution here. I think DPS heroes, they don't need to be reworked, they need their utility to be upped a little bit. And in response, I mean, sure, their damage could be nerfed, they could remain balanced, but I think utility would help so much because it would actually give you a reason to pick one DPS over another. There should only be a few that are based on pure damage, but right now you have Hanzo, Widowmaker, McCree, Soldier 76, and like Tracer, who all just rely on their damage. It's all they do, and when some are easier to land damage with, Reaper is included in that. When all these heroes are just being relied on for damage, you just pick the one with the most damage, and that's pretty much it. I think the tactical value of the utility in every DPS hero's kit needs to be reevaluated. Only a few should be completely damage based, like Tracer, because none of her abilities actually do damage or have any team utility. She should definitely rely on her damage, but like McCree's flashbang, that thing is only used for McCree to get kills. There is very little utility involved with it, but it could be so much more. You could do something to it to make it more utility based, and then you'd see McCree being picked over other heroes, not because he does more damage, but because his utility in the situation is optimal. And then like someone like Widowmaker could actually shine because she would want, like Tracer, she would actually rely on her damage. So what I'm saying is some of the DPS heroes should definitely be focused on DPS, but right now it seems like they're all focused on DPS, which is a problem. I think the utility in their kits should be upped a little bit, maybe drop the damage on some of them, and hopefully we'd see more DPS variety, more hero variety in the game. Not just different 2 heroes, but maybe seeing a 3rd hero from the assault or defense category making it into team compositions, maybe only running 1 tank, or in certain situations 1 healer. Now, before we go, I have one other solution that I think could fix the problem. Tanks have always been powerful in Overwatch. In my opinion, they've been too powerful. And if you're going to try to argue this, just remember, we have every new composition we've seen, every meta-changing team composition has involved having more than 2 tanks. We've seen the 3-3 comp, we've seen the 3-2-1 comp, heck, we've even seen a 4 tanks, 2 healers composition in certain tournaments. Even though there are far more DPS heroes in the game, We haven't seen that with DPS. We've only seen it with tanks. 4 tanks. We've never seen 4 damage dealers. That is absurd. That would be crazy. So with that fact being mentioned, you have to accept the fact that tanks are definitely powerful. What do I suggest they do to tanks to, tone them back, make them different? Is tone down their damage. Their damage is just far too high. They're doing it to Zarya. I think they need to do it with Roadhog. Winston is fine, but the damage on tanks shouldn't be a thing. Tanks shouldn't be able to deal that much damage. It really devalues the DPS role. When all the DPS heroes are worse than the tank heroes, and they're the biggest category of hero, you have a problem. So I think the simplest solution, which is why I saved it for last, to having too many DPS players, not enough DPS variety in the game, is to have weaker tanks damage. Why should Reinhardt be nano boosted? People nano boost Reinhardt because he does lots of damage, and his health pool allows for him to basically be invincible when nano boosted. It's why Ana's being nerfed. It's Reinhardt pretty much alone. Honestly, when tanks do that much damage to the point where you're buffing their damage over your damage dealer's damage, that seems like a bit of a problem to me. So to sum up this very long and unorganized video, I think the problems that I've been addressing are the fact that 1, there are way too many DPS players compared to the amount of DPS players that are needed in game. You only need 2, but every game has at least 4. That's bad. That's a bad ratio. The fact that there isn't enough DPS variety, which would solve the other problem, is bad. And the fact that tanks do damage sometimes more than the damage dealers is the third problem. I think the solution to all of this could be quite simply either buffing the utility in the damage dealers kits, that way they aren't just picked for their damage, or nerfing the damage on the other classes and making damage dealers actually needed to kill people. When you can run a composition with all tanks and still get kills, something seems off. Tell me what you guys think. Hopefully you all agree. If you want to have a discussion below, leave a comment, and hopefully I'll respond. Leave a like if you enjoyed, because it helps me so much. It promotes my videos and stuff. And follow me on Twitter at LoneHawk with a 0, not no. I'll see you guys all later. LoneHawk out.